Today's story is centered around 4 enchanted cups. A cup that nullifies and cancels out poison. So even if there's poison in the cup itself, it nullifies the poison like a pre-antidote. A cup that kills anyone who has committed murder. So if you haven't committed any kind of murder, you can drink from the cup fine. But if you have, the cup will kill you. It's like drinking poison. A cup that removes a person's ability to feel anything for 24 hours. It's great for if you have anything painful to go through, like surgery. And a cup that makes everyone around you feel exactly what you're feeling, and it lasts for 24 hours as well. So if you're feeling good, everyone feels good. And if you're feeling bad, then everyone feels bad. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of magic, fairy tales, and enchantment, then Mystic Maze is your channel, and we upload one new story a week. So if that sounds good to you, please bash the like button like you're trying to break it. Also, please subscribe to our channel and visit us at mysticmaze.net. Okay, let's get into today's story, Cups of Fire. A few miles south, in a city called Sunstone, there was a woman named Leora, who was the head steward for a wealthy nobleman named Hakan. Leora was a very good steward of everything that Hakan owned, partially because it was in her nature to excel. But it was also because through the years, Leora had grown to love Hakan. You see, Hakan had never married. And so Leora was kind of hoping that one day he'd notice how good she was, but thus far, even after years, it just hadn't worked out like that. But still, Leora looked after everything Hakan owned like it was her own. And so when disturbing news that involved Hakan reached her ears, she was very concerned and took it with the utmost seriousness. A boy servant that frequents the marketplace overheard a credible rumor that a conspiracy was developing that involved Hakan. The rumor was there was a plan to poison Hakan and make it look as if he simply caught a fatal illness. Immediately upon hearing the rumor, Leora quickly informed Hakan, but he blew the rumor off. He had full confidence in his cooks and his food prep, that everybody had been in the family for so long that no one would betray him like that. But Leora wasn't so sure, because she had overheard, the way the cooks talk and the way that servants talk. And she knew the spite that servants and anybody in the service industry can develop around anyone they're serving. So she wasn't so sure. She knew that for any servant, it would be easy to convince themselves that for whatever reason, Hakan deserved to be poisoned. So she visited a poison specialist and asked him, what can I do? But the poison specialist told her there wasn't much he could do unless he knew exactly the kind of poison they were planning on using. So he wasn't much help. So desperately, she finally decided to visit this potter who, there was a rumor that this guy dabbled in enchantment. And this was, she was desperate, so she decided to go to him and ask him if there's anything that he can do for her. The potter's name was York, and he immediately took a liking to Leora because of how concerned she was for her lord, and he liked her. So York came up with a perfect solution, and it didn't take long for him to present her with a beautiful emerald green cup. It was like a chalice. The cup had undergone the enchantment process and now possessed the ability to nullify any poison that someone drank. So if you accidentally poison yourself, you could just fill this cup up with water and drink from it, and it would nullify the poison. And this enchantment was so strong that even if you poured the poison directly into the cup, into the very liquid that you were drinking, the poison would have no effect. The enchantment not only made the liquid an antidote, it nullified any kind of poison that you would have put into the cup, even directly. This greatly pleased Leora, and she gave the guy a hug and said, "Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you," and quickly took it home to Hakan. She immediately told Hakan what the cup did and explained to him that she didn't want him to drink anything unless it was out of this cup, out of this chalice. She explained to him the whole thing. And the cup worked. Like 3 attempts had been to poison Hakan by one of his servants, and none of them worked. Borin, the cook that was in on the whole conspiracy, the guy that was actually trying to poison him, the 3rd time dumped enough poison in it to kill 3 people. He dumped it directly into the cup and was stunned by the fact that it had absolutely no effect. He couldn't figure it out. He was like, I don't know what's going on here. I just gave him enough poison to kill 3 people, and he drank it like it was just ordinary water. But it didn't take him long to suspect Leora had something to do with his immunity. You see, Leora was a foreign woman from Etherwood, a rival city of Sunstone. And Ethelwood had a reputation for powerful magic. There was a few powerful magicians in Ethelwood, and everyone knew it. So Borin watched how Leora just hovered over Hakan all the time. She wouldn't ever let him out of her sight. She managed everything he ate and drank. She was always there, and he was sure that she was the issue here. So Borin met up with the noblemen that were actually trying to kill him, the guys involved in the other political party that wanted him gone. And they all 3 came up with a plan to get Leora out of the house for a second. They needed her out, away from Hakan, at least to give this a try, because they were at their wits' end at this point. And they came up with a plan. And their plan was to hire a bachelor nobleman named Nestor. Now, Nestor was a guy that was good with the ladies. He was a good-looking guy. He is a perpetual bachelor, a kind of a playboy, and he had a gambling problem. So they knew that they were going to be able to like hire him to do anything, because he always needed money, and he wasn't above taking somebody out for pay. But when he asked Leora, he kind of took her by surprise, and she thought to herself, why not? Things, she needed a break. Things hadn't worked out romantically between her and Hakan, and she thought, why not? One night couldn't hurt, and so she accepted his invitation, even though it surprised her. So she went out with Nestor, and he was a handsome guy, and she thought, why not give it a shot? Been a long time. She was happy to, again, entertain a suitor, even if it was a long shot. But Leora's worst fears came true the next morning when she got the news. Hakan had died in his sleep the night before from a sudden extreme fever. Leora was destroyed. She was racked with guilt that had happened on the very night, the one night she decided to go out, the one night she was not in the house. But her shock and sorrow quickly turned to anger and suspicion when she found out that he had not been drinking from the emerald cup that he was supposed to be drinking from. She had implored him to drink from this cup, and it turns out she found out that he had not been drinking from it that night. To compound her sorrow and grief, she also found out that Hakan had left everything to her. If something should happen, he had it in his will that she should inherit everything. He didn't have any kids. He didn't have any wife. So this made her feel even more guilty. It made her feel more guilty and more angry and more determined to find out who had done this. Because at this point, she was pretty sure that this was part of the conspiracy that she'd been warning him about for months now. So she wasted no time launching an investigation, and she started asking everybody what they were doing. She started just going on a full investigation, and her zeal was starting to raise eyebrows, and this started making people nervous. it started making people nervous because they were like, this chick's going to cause trouble. But they weren't, it wasn't like a huge deal, because right now it was just suspicions. And as long as no one talked, which of course only Boren was involved, and they knew he wasn't going to say anything, they weren't that worried. It was just a rambling of a mad foreign woman. But when Leora, she had run into all the dead ends, she couldn't figure out anything else to do, so she wound up back at Yorick's. She didn't know what else to do, so she wound up back at Yorick's. Back at Yorick's, asking if there was anything he could do for her. She told him she suspected that it was one of the cooks, but she didn't know which one. She asked him if he could make one of his enchanted cups that would possibly make them confess, but he told her no, there's a few things, like he knows some enchantments, but that just wasn't one of them that he had the ability to do. But she begged him. She was like, please, you have to help me out here. So he thought about it for a little bit, and then an idea struck him. He said, I may have a solution for you, but it's not a pretty solution. So 3 days later, York presents her with a beautiful, pure white porcelain chalice. He told her this cup has a deadly enchantment on it. Drinking from the cup would cause the immediate death of anyone who has committed the act of murder. Anyone else who drank from the cup was fine. They could drink from it as if it was a normal cup, and it behaved like a normal cup. They wouldn't feel anything. But a person guilty of knowingly causing the death of someone, the cup would kill instantly and with great pain. Again, in all of his wit and skill, she hugged him, told him, thank you, thank you, thank you. She doesn't know how she can repay him, gave him a big old hug, and ran back home with this beautiful white porcelain chalice. That night, she called all the cooks together and acted like she was in a jolly mood. She acted like she was just happy and just kind of wanted to drink and have a party. She honestly looked a little drunk already. She told them that she wanted to celebrate her great fortune in inheriting, this whole estate and everything that Hakan had. And at first the cooks were reluctant because they were kind of salty at her for, her good fortune. No servant wants to suddenly wind up working for his fellow servant who has just now become the master. You know what I mean? That makes it kind of salty. But she told them that she was going to break out the extra special wine that was in the basement. They all knew about it, and it was extremely expensive wine. So when she told them that, they were like, all right, sounds good. Like, let's do it. I'm curious to know what that wine tastes like. So they all sit down, and quickly she told them that they're going to play a drinking game. The contest would be to see who could hold their liquor the best. Each person would take one drink from the cup and then answer a question that everyone should know. So it was like, it was a simple question. And they were going to do rounds. And, when you couldn't answer a simple question, you were out. Last one standing wins. So Leora eagerly placed her new beautiful white chalice on the table, kind of gave a smirk, a daring grin as she poured the wine. She smiled and handed the cup to her right. But it just so happened that Boren was the first person to her right to receive the cup. Now Boren, more than anyone else, didn't really want to be drinking with this woman. He didn't want to be there at all. Furthermore, he greatly distrusted her, of course. And after all the years that he's worked with her, he's never once seen her get all fun and want to drink and party. So not only did he not want to be around her for what had happened, but her behavior right now was way out of character. So he was suspicious. But he couldn't like draw attention to himself. So he had to quickly come up with like, because he, after what he had done, he didn't want to drink anything someone just handed him. You know what I mean? He was, what do you call it? He was suspicious of any strange drink handed to him, especially in this scenario. So he took the cup, stared at it a little bit, like looked inside of it, gave it a little sniff, looked around. He watched Leora's eyes. Everything inside him told him not to drink from that cup. But what could he do? He couldn't just say no. That would look awful suspicious. It might even imply, bring up the idea of poisoning. And that was the last thing he wants everyone to start thinking about when, you know what I mean? Because it might connect with what happened to Hakan. So he pushed the cup back to Leora and said, "You should have the first taste of this exquisite wine," and watched her reaction, waiting for her to refuse. But she shrugged and laughed and acted all tipsy and said, "All right, fine." "So formal, Boren," she said with a smile. "Well, I'll suppose I have to get used to this kind of treatment," she remarked, picking up the cup. "If you insist." At that, she closed her eyes, took a sip of the wine, swished it around in her mouth, and swallowed. All the while, Boren eyeing her closely. That's good. "Now, what's my question?" she asked with a cackle. The scene had somehow grown so intense that everyone kind of forgot that they were supposed to come up with a question. And they all kind of snapped out of it. And they were like, "Oh." And so they rattled off a question, and she laughed, and she answered the question. But she didn't pass it back to Boren. She said, "Why don't we just go left?" And so she passed it to the cook on her left. The second cook took a drink. And of course he said, "Some good wine." And, the next cook, same thing. He took a drink, swirled it around in his mouth like he knew what good wine was supposed to taste like. And he remarked that it was really good too. And the whole while, Boren is watching him and he's like, "I guess I'm just paranoid." So by the time it actually got to him, he was like legit wanting to know what that wine tastes like because everybody's talking about it. He wanted to know what all the fuss was about. But immediately it hit him. His throat closed shut. He started clamping at his chest and his throat. He couldn't figure out where the burning was. The two other cooks immediately leaped forward, knowing something was wrong, trying to help him. Only Leora kept seated, unsurprised. Boren looked up at her, like gasping, and he could see that vengeful look on her face, that uncaring, hateful look. And he knew what time it was. He collapsed, was taken by a violent seizure. When he finally stopped shaking, the cooks took his pulse and they were like, he's dead. They glanced up at Leora looking for directions, but to their surprise, she just said, "Let him lie. He's the one," she continued. "He's the one that killed Hakan. I wasn't sure who it was, but when he refused the drink at the beginning of this, I knew it was him. Throw him outside in the back. Let the pigs eat him." She finished coldly, picked the cup up, walked out. Well, what happened to Boren didn't take long for that news to reach the ears of the other two conspirators, the other two noblemen. And when they heard it, they were terrified because they knew that she was a foreign woman. They knew she was from Etherwood, and they didn't know it was a cup. They just thought she must be a sorceress. She must be powerful. So they immediately went into panic mode. They had to do something about her because they didn't know what she was capable of. She had to be dealt with immediately. So Severin, one of the conspirators, one of the nobleman conspirators, contacted Maxim, who was a personal advisor of the king. So this guy was high up. So he talked him into arresting Leora and told him she was a foreign woman from Etherwood, who was obviously a witch. And at once, Maxim had her arrested. Now, the group wasted no time in taking advantage of the fact that he had her arrested around this time. It was a great feast. It was a harvest festival feast. And there was a lot of people in this like hall, in this, meeting hall of the city. So right after everybody got done eating, Maxim brings Leora up in front of the crowd. He told the crowd that Leora had killed Hakan, her lord. He told the crowd that she had hired Boren to poison him, and then he sealed her fate, explaining why she did it. He asked her directly. He said, who was the beneficiary of Hakan's estate should he die? Which, of course, Leora responded, it was me. Of course, the crowd gasped, and Maxim, repeated that she must have killed him for the money. She knew she would get his entire estate. He then accused her of killing Boren so that no one would find out. When the crowd was sufficiently calling for her death, Maxim hushed the crowd and suggested her crimes merited death by the brazen bull. This excited the crowd, of course. They all cheered gleefully. For not only would this be an execution, it would be a spectacle as well. Now, the brazen bull is a hollow statue of a bull. And what they do, it has a hatch on it. And what they do is they take a person and they put it inside the bull through the hatch. And then they put fire, like wood, underneath the bull. And with the person inside, they light the fire. And of course, the fire heats up the metal bull, and the person inside doesn't have any place to put their hands or their feet. They immediately start frying. It's a unbelievably hideous, torturous death. And to add to this horrific torture, they put a whistle in the nose of the bull. So when the person inside starts screaming, the whistle goes off, and people know that the louder the whistle, the louder the person is inside screaming. So it's a nightmare. So the crowd cheered, and he called to bring in the bull because it wasn't in the hall at the time. So they had to have somebody go get it. But while they were going and getting it, witnesses began to come forward. First, Nestor stood up, the guy that she went on the date with. And he told everybody, he said, she couldn't have done it. She was with me, and I was hired to take her out that night. And he told this to the crowd. Then the prison specialist stood up, and he started talking about how he doesn't think that she did it because she came to him asking for a poison antidote, not for poison. She said that she was worried about Hakan, and she wanted an antidote, but he couldn't help her. But she did come to him worried that Hakan would be poisoned and wanting some help to prevent it. And then, of course, Yorick stood up and told the crowd that she couldn't have done it because the cups that he gave her were enchanted. He's the one that enchanted them. And the one cures poison, and the other one will only kill you if you are a murderer. Well, the crowd was silent. The three witnesses, were making a lot of sense. The crowd was starting to think that, maybe they're right. Maybe she's not the one. Maybe we should have like a real trial, because they're making a lot of sense. And then the brazen bull came through the door, and they were all kind of disappointed. They were like, I really wanted to watch somebody burn in that bowl today. But these three guys came up and said she wasn't the one that did it, so they're kind of ruining the party. But seeing that they lost the crowd, Maxim got back up. He realized that, the crowd's going sideways. They're not on board with this now. I gotta bring this back. So he started saying, whose side are you gonna take? You gonna take the side of this foreign woman from Ethelwood, our sworn enemy, the enemy of Sunstone? Remember the three that Ethelwood killed last year? Remember when Ethelwood put to death Nikias, who was a hero of Sunstone? You're going to take her side. So a lot of them hated Ethelwood. Of course, the connection made no sense, not to Leora, but guilty or not, it worked the crowd up. You know, they started thinking about all those other things, and they didn't care. They hated Ethelwood, and she was an outsider. And besides that, they wanted to watch somebody burn in this bull. They wanted to watch this cruel spectacle that they don't get to watch very often. So they began cheering again for the death of Leora, and there was nothing Nestor or Yorick could say to stop them. You know, they tried to start yelling, but the crowd was yelling. The crowd was yelling for her death. They didn't care anymore. So the men began putting wood underneath that bull. When Yorick saw them putting the wood underneath the bull, he knew there was no hope. So he went over to Leora, knelt down next to her. She was visibly in shock because of what was about to what was about to happen. And with a deep sorrow, he said to her, all I can do is give you a choice. And she's in shock, but she looks up at him confused. A choice. And so Yorick pulls out 2 chalices, 2 cups, one blue and one red. He held up the blue one and he told her, "You drink from this one and you won't feel anything. It removes all feeling for a whole day, for 24 hours, and it'll be over by then." And the other one, she asked. He looked her deep in the eyes and said, "With the red one, you will feel everything, all the way to the end. But the enchantment in the cup will make everyone around you feel everything that you feel. So anything that you feel, they will feel as well. Anything you feel, everyone will feel it." So he filled the 2 chalices with water and put them both in front of her to choose. So Yorick pushes back through the crowd and taps Nestor on the shoulder, as well as the poison specialist. Says, "Gentlemen, please come with me. You don't want to watch this anyway." So the 3 left the hall. But Yorick did something weird. When they left the hall, he started boarding the door shut from the outside. And the other 2 didn't know what he was doing, but they helped him. They were like, "I'm not sure what he's doing, but what's going on in there is a travesty." And so they just helped him. So he barred the door. Then he nodded to him, "Gentlemen," and all 3 of them went back home. Well, the crowd began to cheer as that first tongue of fire began to start licking the bottom of the bowl. But very soon afterwards, they all began to feel something strange, a strange heat. They all began to glance around at the windows, wondering, could this fire be making this room that hot? But it didn't take long for them to all realize that something was very, very wrong. When the first whistle of the bull went out, it could barely be heard over the screams of the people inside that place. Hands burned, shins burned. They couldn't get away from it. The searing pain, the unseen fire. Screams and wails went out with dread and panic as they all dashed for the door. But none of them could get out. The door was barred. People around the door were trampled to death. The pain was so great and lasted so long that some of them died right there in the hall from just the pain. The torture went on for an unbearably long time, driving some of them to insanity. When it was finally over and they escaped the hall. Many of them had swollen arms and swollen legs and swollen back, as if their skin had been burned. So many of them died and were irreversibly mentally damaged that no one ever mentioned the brazen bull from that day forward. The brazen bull was destroyed, never used again in Sunstone, and no one would ever attend executions for years because of what had happened. The event was never forgotten in Sunstone. Well, that's it, guys. Hope you liked the story. Please, again, like and subscribe. And check out our other story, the one we did last week. I'm going to put it there. And I'll see you for another one next week. Thanks all.